Thank you for joining us. This is live with Miami's Community News, and we're here today with Reinaldo Borges from Borges and Associates Architect. And we're going to be talking about buildings, significant buildings in Miami-Dade County and around the country, things that you've worked on and participated in, and the future of the look and function of Miami-Dade County. There's a building downtown that we're all familiar with, the American Airlines Arena. We're going to put it up on the screen so we can talk about that, all right?
Thank you.
All right. Yes. And just as people are looking at this, maybe you can flip through some of the pictures over there as we're talking. You've been in this arena for how long? Not that arena, but in the art in the.
Well, been practicing architecture for 34 years. I've had my own firm now for 21 years. When I was involved as design director for the arena, I was working with Arquitectonica, which is our homegrown iconic architecture firm. So yeah, I've been in my solo practice now for 21 years, doing small, medium, and large projects.
So one of the things about architects, maybe engineers, but people that are futuristic, they can look down the road and say, not just what will it be, but what can we create? And I know that we're responsible for our own future.
Yes.
And it takes visionaries to be able to say, this is functional, this will work. But there's some special things in South Florida that we have to be concerned with versus if we were in Omaha, there would be other things. But let's talk about the American Airlines Arena and the work that you did on that so we can take a look at it. Andres, can you put it up?
Yeah, so I mean, the site selection here was amazing, right? The first arena in these coastal cities that had a front to a boulevard. So it has a very civic front, but also it has a relationship to Biscayne Bay, which is one of the most beautiful bays in the country. And, that was very attractive, I think, for Mickey Harrison and the team, to really have a place where, let's say at halftime, you could go out there to that plaza and enjoy the bay and be outdoors and connect with the environment. So it has that duality between the urban connection and the connection to the bay. And it is also very elevated. So from a climate change resiliency point of view, even though at that time, because this was designed about 24 years ago, we really were not talking that much about our concerns of the rising seas and climate change.
But did you get it? Did you envision that?
Well, so because we wanted to get one level of parking under the arena, we talked about where that level would be and its relationship to sea level. And during a storm surge, how does it flush out? So we did have a coastal engineer work with us on that, Harvey Sasso and his team at Coastal Systems International. And we thought through that in terms of where do we put that, and then how does that elevate the entire arena? And then how does that affect the relationship and transition to Biscayne Bay? Obviously, elevating over Biscayne Bay was nice because it elevates you and you get a better panoramic view the more you elevate that deck, right? But there was a lot of concern about the section. Sections in architecture is really, slicing through the building and understanding how it relates to the ground. And I think this is one of those buildings that started to be elevated for many reasons, from the functional side, the parking side, but also, we were thinking about the fact that the storm surge would be affecting this building and that the building would certainly not be affected by our typical storm surge event.
So one of the things that we recognize is sometimes you build way in advance and then others will follow. And we know that it's sort of like an image, which is all these little pixels. You put enough pixels in there, all of a sudden, there's a picture that is created. So what is the picture, what's the picture downtown look like from now looking forward?
Look, so we are blessed by, living in a coastal city that is so beautiful, right? I'm a recreational aviator and I fly over this Biscayne Bay and I just sort of say, wow, this is magical. It's so blessed to be here. At the same time, that's also part of our danger, right? We live between two bodies of water, the Atlantic and the Everglades, right? And we're challenged here with what I tend to call water world at times, because the water issue incrementally becomes a danger to us. It's one of the stresses that we have to deal with, right? So as an architect in these coastal cities, I've been to the Netherlands, sort of understanding, how coastal cities and how cities throughout the world are having to deal with greater concern of water, whether it's, greater concerns of flood events like we've seen in Europe this year and in other parts of this country, just rain events, that were unexpectedly, damaging to communities. Or in South Florida, we have both. We have rain and we have incremental sea level rise. So when you look at that and you look at this beautiful context of a city that's on the edge, and we continue to thrive on the real estate side, because what sells units is really that view of Biscayne Bay. You were telling me now about your son living in this wonderful environment overlooking the port of Miami and that very dynamic environment. I think we are certainly, we're having to really think through that, and there's a lot of thought process going on now in the community about that future. As an architect, I start to project into that future, start to create projects that sort of live in that future world, where we start living with more water, and we embrace the water. Instead of fighting the water, we start to really design into the water. There's certain limits on how much we could elevate the community. There's a lot of talk about elevating roads, infrastructure, and obviously one building at a time. Every time we design a new building, we want to elevate it. So now we have freeboard ordinances that we have carved into our zoning codes that allow us to start to elevate, new construction.
So a year or so ago, we were looking at Miami Herald, and there was a story in there about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers wanting to put together a multi-billion-dollar something.
A wall. It's a wall.
To prevent the water from the bay going onto the streets.
Yes.
What is going on with that?
And that, the Army Corps is trying to do something of benefit and to protect our community with a wall that basically will help mitigate the issue of the storm surge impact on the coast. It is a certain problem that we definitely need to face. When we see what Dorian did in the Bahamas, for example, you realize that if we get a storm like that we haven't really seen, I think, since the 1920s, that comes straight down Biscayne Bay, over Miami Beach, right into the urban core of the city, it really changes the mindset, because I think that we'll see what that water really does as it penetrates into the community. It is very damaging. So I think the wall idea is a necessary conversation, but from an urban design point of view, you start worrying about on what side of the wall you end up being in the city, right? So imagine a wall like that along Brickell Avenue, separating the street, and in certain neighborhoods, doing the same. So it's a big problem to solve, and unfortunately, engineering doesn't solve it by itself. So it really requires a lot of sort of what I would call surgical urbanism to come in and look at landscape features and soften the impact of such a wall. So you could design into a barrier like that with creativity and soften its impact on the community, right? But you're still going to have a significant wall separating you. And
do you think that's going to happen?
Well, so it's a long-term project, right? And Jim Murley, our resiliency officer at the county, as you know, is at the forefront of that conversation with the Army Corps and our mayor, Daniela. And there's a lot of conversation with the community, with stakeholders, like Swire, for example, has a significant interest in this, because, Brickell City Center and Brickell would be impacted. They're going to be on the west side of this wall. So there are players like that really want to influence the creative process that will lead to a better wall, to a softer impact. We still need to concern ourselves with how do we protect the city from significant storm surge. At best, if that project goes forward at full speed, and we're talking about implementing this in about 15 to 20 years. So that's the way infrastructure works, right?
Yes. Yeah. So first it's this crazy idea, and then somebody takes it a little serious and they start looking at it. Down in the Keys, from a simplistic point, they said, put everything up, right?
Right. So elevating, of course, the Florida Keys is a simpler place
Yes.
in terms of its buildings and its typologies. We're more complex because we have urban core, we have, commercial buildings mixed in with residential buildings. A lot of the, commercial buildings we have in Brickell, downtown, were not designed with the concept that they're going to be affected by, the impact of sea level rise and climate change, with, incremental storm surge damage. As we understand it right now, we're looking at about 8 to 10 feet in 100 years. So if you kind of project that into decades, that's about a foot of more water in the ocean every 10 years. So we start to really relate to our lifespan and our political cycles and what it really means to us, right? So we need to make immediate changes. We need to think about this future, I think, in every project. The county, for example, is prescribing in every RFP that they put out that you consider sea level rise and new elevations and new strategies to protect, county facilities and infrastructure projects. But we need to do that at every level, you know.
So put aside sea rise when the rain comes, which it does almost
Yes.
all the time, and we see downtowns getting flooded. And years ago, with the two 100-year back-to-back storms, not hurricanes, but rainstorms, we had some property near the levee. So
Yes.
imagine that was the ocean or
Yeah.
the bay.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was 2 weeks
Yeah.
of water mid-calf on that property there.
So yes, this is not just a sea level rise issue, but the rain events is an issue, and the fact that we have sea level, it starts to compromise the capacity to absorb that rainwater, right? So, you know, when a big rain event is coming, we have to be flushing out our canal system, so we have more capacity to capture that water. And South Florida Water Management District is always, you know, challenged by that process, you know.
So those things they're not simple solutions to that. And I'm sure you know Phil Stoddard, biologist and
Yes.
former mayor here,
Yes.
and he was telling me about 10 years ago, I think,
Yes.
started talking about this stuff, and I'm going,
Yeah.
really?
Well, I mean, he's smart and he
Yes.
understands what's going on.
Yes.
He knows the geology that challenges us, and he knows the reality of the political world and how slowly we are in adapting to these things, right? You know, I just finished a house in South Miami. It's our first project that really got solar integrated into the house. And I owe it to him and his vision, and you know, him bringing that into the code, because we need to codify resiliency and sustainability in order to allow designers to really make the right choices and not just be out there, you know, being you know, futurist without the backup of the building and zoning codes.
So there's a young lady, I forget her first name, the last name was Reynolds. She was a high school student. She was the one with some help that brought it to the city of South Miami. How about some solar stuff? Well, over a period of a couple of years, she began to be a speaker in many places.
Yes.
And recently, she finished college. She got accepted to the University of Miami Law School and PhD program at the same moment.
She's amazing. She's amazing. And
What was her first name?
I forget. I'm terrible with names, but she was, you know, she energizes me, right? Because it's the youth that really inherits this problem longer term than we. At my age, you know, I still have a good amount of years left, but you know, I think of my daughters, I think of my granddaughter, I think about that future that we leave for them, right? So it's always encouraging to see the youth, you know, get involved and realize that they could make an impact. You know?
And that drives us.
Yes.
People a little bit older to make a difference. We frequently talk with the folks in Miami-Dade County, the public, the recycling folks, and animal protection services. And when we see what they are doing to try to make this county better, and realizing that the push is for the younger people who will have a lifetime of these good habits rather than people that are in their 60s or 70s, right? So what are some cities or countries to where they've dealt with this water issue, sea rise changes that have been occurring that seem to be working pretty well?
Look, I mean, to me and most people that understand how engineering is affecting this and how we're thinking through this, the Netherlands is really on the frontier of the concern because they are mostly below sea level, right? So for them, it was existential like years ago, right? This is not something new for them. So in visiting with them and many other mayors of Rotterdam and Amsterdam and understanding the political concerns and the engineering concerns and the sociological concerns and the urbanistic concerns, they're doing a good job, right? The biggest concern that they told me they had was that their citizens would trust government too much, you know, and government really wants people to be engaged and to pay attention. Because over there, they actually simulate flood events, because flood events over there could happen really fast. And they have technology that simulates that by neighborhood, which helps them to evacuate people and create, you know, safe evacuation of areas. But they're looking at technologies that you know, sometimes we can only dream of right now, let's say in South Florida, and they invest into the infrastructure. So in the Netherlands, for example, a bridge is not just a bridge. It's also a protection system, you know, for mitigating flood events. It handles water capacity on both sides of the bridge at times. So we need to be thinking that way in the U.S., right? We need to be thinking as we now hopefully get some funding to invest into our infrastructure throughout the country, and specifically in communities like South Florida. We need to think about that. We need to think about the durability of the solutions, how they behave through time. You know, right now we just finished doing our stormwater master plan for the city of Miami. I mean, I served the commission in a resiliency task force, the only architect sitting on this committee for a while. And I tell you, the biggest challenge we have is like, okay, now we have a plan, but we don't have the funding to really implement the plan. So when I ask capital improvements, what's needed, to implement this plan, which would allow us to capture more of this water and drainage solutions throughout our city, it's about $4.3 billion price tag.
And there are competing projects. For instance, I know the county's pushing hard to start eliminating septic tanks, many billions of dollars, right?
Yes.
Significant to the homeowner as well, right?
Yes.
And right now, the question is, okay, what do we do with this wastewater, right? That's going to be now added on. And when you look at all these projects, this infrastructure, things that need to be done, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine how we're just going to magically make this money and start those projects.
It's a significant concern that, the problem is complex, the solutions are expensive, and that also means that everybody has to pay into that solution, right? And that's always not popular as a politician, to sort of tell people we're going to have to increase fees and taxes, to help pay for these things. I mean, Phil Levine, as you know, experienced that when he started to install pumps in Miami Beach. Is how do we pay for this? And, is it worth it? And is there a return on this investment? All these questions come up. And, Miami Beach, to credit them, because they've been on the frontier of this, have started to do analysis on return on investment on this infrastructure investment. And they see the positive results, of that investment. I think is necessary. If you would imagine Miami Beach without these pumps right now, it would be a totally different place.
Let's talk for a moment about solar power on people's homes. Let's say somebody's been in their house for 15 years. The guy's 50 years old. He says, okay, what is it going to cost to do this? All right. And I'm going to be paying for the product instead of paying over there.
Right.
What's going to move people to become more conscious of the environment, so they would say, this is worth it to do that, right? What has to happen to the psyche to say, I'm going to invest this? I have a friend who put up 120 solar powers. He's 82. And I said, why did you do that? He says, because I think it's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, it's about that, right? But we human beings are not persuaded a lot until things become into a crisis mode, right? So we are now in a red zone, climate change driven conversation internationally, right? We're now going back into the Paris Agreement. I think is necessary for all of us to contribute, right? So I believe in the power of one. Okay, one individual could change the world. If you really go at it, it could be a young lady, from Europe that ends up, changing everybody's mindset about this. It could be our local heroes that we have that are young, and it could be a mayor, an architect, a planner. Many people could influence change, right? And we do live now in this sort of a media world that influencers come in different sizes and different contexts. So I think that it's important for everybody to contribute, right? So that's a great story. The return on investment on solar panels, a lot of people have a hard time with that. We're not incentivizing that a lot. I do think we need to incentivize it. Obviously, it took a while for Florida Power and Light to really relax about it and start to embrace it. I still think they see that as taking customers off their grid, and it's going to cost them money. I mean, the more efficient we become with solar on the individual home point of view, Florida Power and Light may see that as a threat to them and their business model. Now, they started to build solar farms, and they're willing to sell you power that is being generated in those solar farms. So I think that's very clever, and I'm excited about that. But at the same time, from a resiliency point of view, you want to have your solar generation on your site, on your building, on your rooftop.
Yes.
But
we know that the county in their one of their recycling areas, when they take this not the recycling, the other when they burn the trash there, that power powers up 35,000 homes, right?
Yes.
During the year, plus the building. And you look at that is really significant. When you look at it, you go, that is so cool to be able to do that. And there's only about 10% refuse that's left over. And that feels really good. But let's talk about on battery operated cars, right? I'm a truck guy, all right? And I like my noise. Maybe I'll get used to something else. My big concern is when I run low on fuel, I know I can go to the corner and I can get refueled. So for the folks that have cars that are battery operated, it seems as though at this point they have to plan in advance, right? How does
Yes.
that work?
Okay, so I have to declare to you that, after being in love with my Range Rover for many years, I made the change now. I now have an Audi e-tron electric vehicle for about 4 months now. It really changes the way you look about keeping your car moving, right? Because it's not as easy as just going to the next gas station and filling up. You need to plan ahead when you charge. You start to understand what a level 1, 2, and 3 charging stations really are. And you really want to have more level 3 around, because in a level 3 station, in 45 minutes, you could recharge your entire car as you have a coffee or a pastelito. But, with a level 2 or level 1, you got to basically wait hours and hours to get recharged, right? So, that's a challenge for us because those transitions are never easy. People still want the convenience of the fueling stations. But we need to start making those changes, and we won't get a lot more of the charging stations until there's greater demand. So it's one of those things that you need to build up the demand in order to get more efficient. And when you hear what General Motors is doing and a lot of the car makers in the
not
U.S.,
too many years.
It's amazing that they've made that decision and that commitment. A lot of that really comes from pressures that they're getting from government, which I think is necessary. But I think the private sector starts to, sort of organically realize that that's the future that we want to go towards.
Well, there's this brilliant billionaire that years ago said, let me put this spaceship up and have him flying around in a Tesla. And it's like, wow, he's a nut, but he's got it. All right.
Yeah.
He just is really so assertive and aggressive with that and has the vision. So we know there has to be the vision. They got to be able to create it. The infrastructure has to be there. So people like me say, you know what? I know where there's 50 of these charging stations and I won't have to wait too long. And certainly one of my hesitancies is if I'm pull up to a charging station and somebody's hooked up for a half an hour and it has the same sort of flow that a gas station does, we wind up, I guess, sitting and waiting. But I think at that point, the consumers of that are going to have it figured out. I have a friend, I have two actually, but when he goes home at night, he just plugs it in and they have another vehicle.
So you change your habits, right?
Yes.
So instead of going to a fueling station and fuel up in 5 minutes and off you go to a place where maybe you read a book or you watch a movie as your car gets charged. I mean, we spend time doing all kinds of things during our days, right? So for those of us that like to read a good article, get informed, look at good stories and good news, it's an opportunity. We changed the way that we are going to be recharging our vehicles. Okay, overnight is easy, right? Because you plug it in, you're sleeping, your vehicle is getting recharged, and that's a simple solution, right? But the level 3 is really the state of the art in recharging, and that's what Tesla is using, and that's where everybody wants to be, right? Tesla is protecting their chargers, by the way, for Tesla owners, which I think is smart. They may open that up now to others, right? But you get educated, you adapt, you adjust the way that you recharge. I go to Naples a lot now on business, and I have to be thinking how I charge up when I'm going and how do I charge to come back,
So one of the things we've seen with Burger King and McDonald's is their switch to drive-through. A gigantic percentage of their business is on drive-through. And they got that down pat. Yes. And so I did this little experiment. I get coffee over there. I pull in the line. And while I'm waiting the minute to 3 minutes, I'm on my phone doing something different, if you will, reading a book there. Yeah. And it's like, I watch how they work. And I go inside. I want to see what's there. They have 2 kiosks that they're not operating. The lunchroom area is closed, and they have 1 cash register. So if you go inside, you're going to be miserable. They've made it so that you can be in your car.
Yeah.
And so that's changed the habits of American public. In 50 years, you go with your family to McDonald's or Burger King, and you take the kids there. That's not happening anymore. It's switched.
Yeah. So, I mean, climate and all these different transformations in our society are questioning, how we shop, how we entertain ourselves. We are a society of convenience, right? We know that. We like to do everything from our cars if possible. I think we do need to transition to renewables as fast as we can. We need to incentivize that transition. It is basically now an emergency, to make that transition as quickly as we can, right? It is not an issue of convenience because, when we take into the sort of the mindset that it's all about our personal convenience, we're not thinking about, the impact that our method of life, which, for a country our size, we are the greatest consumer of fossil fuels, right? That's pretty amazing. That's very telling that we are the most active using fossil fuels in the planet, and we're not the biggest country, right? So, we have to set the example, right? We need to lead by example, and we have to start making small changes, but the small changes add up to big changes, right? If everybody starts to make the right decisions about how we live, how we consume, how we eat, how we exercise, the world becomes a better place. But it starts with the individual.
So years ago, when people would bring bags into the grocery store and put their food in it, that's odd. And
Yeah.
now it's like, you better, all right?
Yeah.
So after talking with the county for many interviews, I learned when I go to a drugstore and buy one or two things, I said, I don't want the bag. Because I know what I'm doing. I'm going to put it in the car. It's going to sit it there for a while. I'll bring it in the house. It'll go up here. It'll go there. And then I wind up throwing it away. So I realized when I declined the use of that, at some point, they're going to be making less plastic bags.
Yeah.
At some point.
Well, there are different things, right? And people get confused that, you're talking about climate change, and then you talk about plastic bags, and you talk about recycling and all these things, right? The sad news is that recycling is not as efficient as we want it to be. And sometimes we think we're recycling something, and it doesn't end up getting recycled,
Yes.
right? So we learned that, which is a sad reality. The lesson, I think, is that we need to use less plastic in the way that we package things, in the way that we consume water and other fluids. We need to get plastic out of that, right?
And so all of that is put together in the sense of, okay, we have the challenge with the water. We have challenges how we put buildings
Right.
in, to use less air conditioning, right? To live the lifestyle that we want and not worry about when it rains, Brickell Avenue is going to get flooded. And I hear about it frequently now, right? I never paid attention to it because it would only be at storms, right? But now it's there frequently. I live in horse country and I live near a canal. One of those storms, you couldn't figure out where the water was or where the street was, right?
So look, I mean, we are thriving on how we dispose of things. We don't even think about it. We need to start thinking that, products have multiple uses and expanded lives, that we don't throw things away, that when we do throw things away, that they are going to be decomposing in a matter of weeks, not in a matter of centuries.
Yes.
So really being good stewards of our planet. This is the only planet we have. So that's an important conversation to have and a different mindset for everybody.
And I think that's what it takes for all of us to be able to say, no, don't litter, all right? Just put it where it needs to go, all right?
Exactly.
And I'm my hat's off to the American public and to the manufacturers. Before, the one-use disposable plastic bottles used to be hard as rock and you could throw it and kill somebody.
Yeah.
Now it's like, okay, I get it. And so we sort of put up with it's not as strong. Okay, because something different is going to happen this go around.
We have organizations now that are doing beach cleanup on weekends, and they're collecting tons of plastics. So who is it that's throwing plastics on our beaches? Who are those people, right? I want to meet them. I want to talk to them. I think that's about being good stewards of the planet. And it starts with that. I think the way we change our habits in terms of consuming carbon, I have been promoting the concept of taxing carbon because unfortunately, until we start to tax something, we don't change our dependencies and our habits. And I think that we need to transition towards renewables. And that's such a big issue, right? Carbon is one of our biggest challenges. So those are concepts that we need to really continue to communicate and educate people. Why does that really matter? Why transitioning to solar is so important, and other sources? Wind, there are all kinds of technologies. It's so amazing to listen to scientists and companies that are doing innovation research about how new technologies are going to help us reduce the impact that we're making on the planet. Aviation is a big concern. None of us really want to stop aviation because it's so convenient. But realistically, aviation is a big problem. And the shipping industry, we celebrate the Port of Miami and these beautiful cruise ships. They are like the biggest polluters on our planet. So what are we going to do? Are we going to shut them down? I mean, are we going to transform?
We saw after the pandemic, been here for a while, we saw some beautiful pictures of Biscayne Bay. The water was pristine.
Yes.
And then we looked at the pictures before.
Yes.
We did that. as
So
a world.
the pandemic taught us that, when we stopped the way we stopped, I mean, it healed the planet, right?
Yes.
But we get back in action right away. And of course, economies don't function unless people are flying around and moving around.
So tell us about the future of new modern homes and of new modern buildings.
So look, I mean, at the single family home side, we're just trying to make sure that we're codifying things so that when an architect anywhere designs a home, they're designing a better home, a future-proofed home, a home that has technology integrated, that has solar integrated, that is elevated. Of course, in South Florida, after Andrews, we really learned our lesson on wind. So we have the best wind code that you could imagine at the moment. And that even gets better through time. We just changed the code at the beginning of this year, and now we're having to design for greater velocity of wind in our wind frames and our structures, especially high-rise architecture. So all these things are moving in the right direction, and people are starting to care about durability of materials, the efficiency of their window systems, efficiency of their air conditioning system, the reduction of water use and reusing water is something that we're going to have to really take seriously. Water is a concern here. We live in water world. We were talking last night about the concern of, desalination plants and could we turn this into, water that we could use? There's plenty of ocean water. Well, that technology is advancing and is reducing its negative impact because, desalination plants really create toxic byproducts that are negative in the way they impact the environment. But in the future, I think, there is, if you talk to the right scientists' mind, they're saying there is progress on desalination, and we're going to have, hopefully a lot more water because water, especially in a South Florida community like this, that's a big concern. To have the water capacity to drink and to sustain life in a community like this.
Let's talk about concrete. I hear some stories that there may be some new concrete that might be developed, taking recycled something.
Yeah, so there's a lot of technology, and University of Miami has a great materials lab. FIU has a great materials lab. There's a lot of good technology coming on board. The challenge is always sort of bringing them into the mainstream of construction, right? Like I started to play with the idea of basalt reinforcing, which is doesn't have steel. So really what causes the corrosion, the spalling, the problems that we see with reinforced concrete is the steel in the concrete. So when you remove the steel and you replace it with a different reinforcing technology, you advance that technology a lot, right? You increase the lifespan of the structure, you reduce the cracking, the spalling, and then the concrete restoration that we have to do in South Florida. I mean, you see high rises being restored all the time on the concrete side because they crack. They're moving. You create cracks. You expose the rebar to oxygen. You have corrosion. So how do you stop that? Well, you improve the quality of the concrete. There are a lot of additives now. You have to increase the strength of the concrete, which is less porous and a tighter mix. And then you have to look at different technologies for reinforcing the concrete. And that's available. The Corps of Engineers are already using basalt reinforcing, and I believe in some infrastructure projects. Right now, I cannot use it in a high-rise residential building. I cannot use it in commercial buildings yet. But these things are coming. I think these technologies are advancing. And we need to think as a society that matters because we're increasing the lifespan of these buildings. And that's very sustainable that we could give buildings a new life.
Sometimes we wonder where the money's going to come from to do it. And one of the things we've learned is you can't let that stop you from doing it. And a perfect example was on a committee years ago in one of the cities. And this committee wanted to design a beautiful two-story community center that included a gym. Somebody says, where's the money going to come from? Some brilliant person on the board says, never mind that. Let's just design it. And sure enough, the federal government paid for like 2/3 of it. But if they would have stopped worrying about what might happen in 2 years or 5 or 10, the concept would never even gotten off the ground. I know you've had experience with that.
Look, so I have an office in Barcelona and I've done work in Europe. And I tell you, in Europe, architects get to design buildings with greater sense of durability and material quality than we do here, right? So that's something that has to change. I mean, we are more of in the disposable of things. I mean, see the city as a disposable city. If it becomes obsolete, we tear it down, we replace it. So there's nothing of greater sustainability in the long term for cities and their infrastructure than to be able to have buildings that are durable, that you could change the use of the building, you could maybe change the skin of the building, you could reactivate it, and you could reuse it, right? But that requires a different mindset that we, so designing to greater quality of materials, and it pays for itself, because the building has greater value, and it affects the fabric of our cities for a longer period of time. That's something that has to change, because sometimes the mentality of a developer may be that I want to build it as inexpensively as I could possibly build it, so I could gain the most profits, and then it becomes somebody else's problem. And that's the concern of the condo association, which we could discuss, the impact of climate change on condo associations, especially along the coast.
So you've been involved for almost 30 years, right?
34 years.
34 years. If people want to find out more about you, they go to your website, BORGES Architects.
BorgesArchitects.com, yes.
And I was there this morning, I looked, and really quite extraordinary. By the way, when I was looking into what we're going to be doing this morning, I found on Google a story that we did on you in 2014.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the changes that have occurred from back then, 2014, to now it is, 8 years later?
Look, I've activated myself in this conversation of climate change and how architects really could influence the way that we design into our cities and the way that we communicate the risk, because we are used to leading, design charrettes and design workshops, and communities rethink how they look and feel and how they're designing into this future. Being an architect in a coastal community, I'm working internationally, but I'm very much here. South Florida is my home. And the state of Florida, as you know, 75% of the population here is on the coast. It's on the edge. It's where we want to be. We want to be on the water, So how do we solve that problem where we have incremental densification of coastal cities, which is a natural trend, and then we have this danger, right? So I said, look, let me activate myself. I created a resiliency task force at the American Institute of Architects, trying to kind of activate the thinking of the local architects here on this issue so that we could become thought leaders throughout the world, because Miami, being at the forefront of this concern, because we're such a flat city and we're so close to sea level that we have a big challenge. I mean, we have the greatest amount of assets at risk from any other city in the planet, okay, in Miami. We're not the biggest city. We're not the biggest city by density nor by landmass, but we are exposed because of the low level of our city. So, here, high ground, I've done projects in the Coconut Grove Ridge, which is, it's about 16 feet above sea level. And that's high ground. When I do a project there, I could do a basement, I could do all kinds of things, right? But on the most part, when you're doing a building that is at 3.5, 4 feet above sea level, that building is going to experience some challenges. So you start to think about elevating. Now, Miami has the ability of elevating 5 feet of what is called freeboard. So you could elevate the design of a new building up to 5 feet without impacting your allowable heights by zoning. Miami Beach did the same thing. In fact, Miami Beach was at the forefront of this, allowing architects, developers, and planners to build higher. The fact is that it's still optional how much higher you want to be. So depending on where you are and how you transition to existing infrastructure, you may not use the complete, 5 feet of freeboard. You may use 2 feet or 1.5 feet or whatever makes sense for you. But again, we have to be elevating as much as we can.
So obviously you're pretty bright and you hang around a lot of bright people. When people of your intelligence and vision get together, does your head buzz when you walk out of the room, say, look, hey, we need to get this done?
Yeah. So, architects go to a convention every year, right? To maintain our licenses active and so on. But it's also great to see 25,000 architects in the same place, right? And the exchange of ideas and the speakers. I mean, that's where I was introduced to Al Gore the first time, which, his book at that time to me was a game changer. Because it is indeed, this is an inconvenience. I mean, nobody is happy about what is happening with our future, but we need to take action, and we need to take it seriously. We can't just hope that it goes away, because it won't.
I think as we look to the past and look to the future, you think of people. The guy started selling books on the internet a while back, and look what he's done, and you have battery operated cars, right? And you have these wonderful homes that are being built in solar power, all these changes that if it was 25 years ago, you'd say that's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be people to allow people to think and to be like Timothy O'Leary did, go into this other space out there and create the future. And we think about, there's a thing called Viewtron 30 years ago, which is the predecessor to the internet.
Yeah.
So Knight Ridder was involved in that. It was a little bit too early, but the concept was there, how you move information faster, right? And so my hat's off to the things that you do and people like you to be able to create a better tomorrow. And we're going to wrap it up here, but I would like you to talk to a young man or young woman, just like they were an uncle, like you were their uncle, and then talk about their future in today's world. Which camera should he look at? The center one right here.
Yes, so indeed, I think that the youth have to engage in activism in a different way, right, than any other youth in any other moment in our society. I think that youth really brings freshness and energy and intelligence. And now we have, I think, the smartest population of youth in this country that are connected 24/7. You guys are great in communicating our challenges and in also activating yourselves and activating others. I think that, you could impact your father, your mother, your grandfather in the way that you make the changes that we need to make sure that we're better stewards of this planet and that we are designing into a more durable, more resilient place. I mean, resiliency is about being able to rebound from any stress that any city, any society has. And I think that that's where I'm involved in that conversation of resiliency, because it means something different to different people. But I think that there's a greater concern about resiliency than sustainability in many ways, but they're all mixed. I think that, what we learn is that the heat that we put into the ocean is there for hundreds of years now, and we can't reverse that. That will continue to create sea level rise impact and the melting of the ice sheets and the dynamics that come with that amount of water. And we just have to understand how we could all participate. I think that if everybody participates, and you sum up, the energy of all this youth that we have, because I really have faith in our youth. I mean, my daughter just started to do a sustainability fashion brand, and it just kind of blows me away that she took that action. So what every individual could do adds up to a lot, so it's not really somebody else's problem, it's all of our problem, and I think that that's the way we need to think. We own this issue. Obviously, all of us that are sort of older folks perhaps have a greater amount of guilt because we have been living la vida loca, in a way that has been perhaps irresponsible. But now it's a moment of real challenge, for society as a whole. And we here in the United States need to set the stage and set the example. And the youth, I think brings a lot of hope for us.
Reinaldo, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And really, thanks for sharing that great information. Folks, if you want to find out more about Reinaldo, feel free to look him up. That's Borges. You can find him all over the internet. You can see some of the great things he's done. Bigger picture stuff is we have to take care of today, look to tomorrow, and take care of that. Folks, thank you for your time, and have a good weekend.